Okay, good morning, everyone. To those on the East Coast and Toronto, and good evening to those joining us from Taipei and Asia. My name is Lynette Ong. I'm director of the China Governance Lab. Welcome to our webinar today, this morning, featuring J. Michael Cole's book, The Taiwan Tinderbox, The Island Nation at the Center of the New Cold War. Let me introduce Michael. Michael is a Taipei-based senior non-resident fellow with the Global Taiwan Institute in Washington, D.C., and the Macdonald-Laurier Institute in Ottawa and the Taiwan Hub at the University of Nottingham. He's also a research fellow and executive editor at the Prospect Foundation and the Strategic Consultants for Government and Private Sector. Until May 2024, he served as senior advisor on countering foreign authoritarian influence with the International Republican Institute. He was previously editor-in-chief of Thinking Taiwan. He founded Taiwan Sentinel and served as editor-at-large for the Taiwan Democracy Bulletin. From 2010 and 2013, he was deputy news editor at the Taipei Times and an editor from 2006 to 2010. So before moving to Taipei in 2005, he worked as an intelligence officer with the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, CSIS. So a very strong Canadian roots. Um, his writing has appeared in Foreign Affairs, Foreign Policy, Wall Street Journal, and various other international publications. So he was born in Quebec City. Uh, Michael holds a master's in war studies from the Royal Military College of Canada and the International Diploma in Humanitarian Assistance and the CX-99 Peacekeeping diploma, and I'll leave it to you to ask him what that diploma is all about. So, thank you for joining us. Michael from Taipei is 10:30 over there, but we are really pleased that you could join us to talk about your new book.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Ong, and thank you to the University of Toronto for inviting me to talk about my new book. It's a great honor to join you. Yes, the new book coming out at a time where there are a lot of questions about what's going to happen in the Indo-Pacific, a lot of uncertainty as well about uh, how the United States under President Trump will continue to involve itself in the Indo-Pacific and what countries in the region are doing, the kinds of adjustments that they need to do to prepare for against different contingencies. So the origin of this book is very much grounded in the Russian invasion of Ukraine back in early 2022 when a lot of assumptions were being questioned, particularly in Taiwan and in my part of the world, where there had been the long-standing view that major powers would ultimately not do the unthinkable, not do the irrational thing like launching a major military invasion against a neighbor, the kind of things that we had seen during World War II, for example. Vladimir Putin's decision to invade Ukraine, notwithstanding the perception that doing so could be disastrous for Russia, then had very strong repercussions here in the region because for countries like Taiwan, now a lot of people here, but also supporters of Taiwan worldwide, were starting to ask, well, if Vladimir Putin did the unthinkable, can we not also assume that at some point Xi Jinping or any future Chinese leader could also decide to do the unthinkable and try to use force against Taiwan? So that compelled me to try to frame the whole issue of Taiwan Strait in the context of the new world order, if you will, in which great powers might indeed decide to do the unthinkable. So that raised a lot of questions about how and why did deterrence fail in the context of Ukraine and Russia and what lessons can be learned both by Taiwan, by the United States, but also by China in countering efforts to deter a potential use of force against Taiwan. So that was the main incentive for writing that book. That's my seventh book on Taiwan. I had the two previous ones were published by Routledge, so they tended to be more a bit heavier in the academic jargon, if you will, and certainly targeting an audience that already is very much aware of what's going on in Taiwan and China, and also governments were quite interested in those types of assessments. Taiwan Tinderbox is aimed more at a general audience, uh, largely because we felt that the developments in Europe, in Ukraine, had created much greater awareness and interest around the world in the Taiwan Strait as well. Oftentimes, media or analysts would say, well, now it was Ukraine, next one might be Taiwan. And as you know, in recent years, Taiwan has certainly made headlines as well with TSMC and the role that Taiwan plays in the production of advanced semiconductors that basically fuel the global economy. So that also has had an impact on people's willingness to learn more about Taiwan. So we felt that it was a great opportunity to use that renewed interest to provide a book that looks at these issues. The challenge in doing that as well is that one cannot write about the issue of Taiwan without going into issues of identity and the reasons why over several years, over decades, we have seen consistent refusal and resistance by the people in Taiwan to be annexed by China. So I do spend the first two chapters in the book taking a fairly deep dive and providing a fairly granular assessment of what makes Taiwan Taiwan and the many reasons why it differs from the People's Republic of China, and why, in my view, those two societies are so incompatible that it's very difficult to imagine any offer that the Chinese Communist Party could make to Taiwan that would have sufficient traction and appeal for the people here in Taiwan. I also endeavor to shed light on the reasons why even the parties that are seemingly more pro-China or more Beijing amenable and more open to having dialogue with China are also themselves comprised of individuals and politicians and voters who also do not want to be annexed by the PRC because they also, as citizens of the Republic of China, or Republic of China, Taiwan, depending on your preference. They also realize that annexation by China would come at a heavy cost in terms of freedoms and liberties that the people here fought for and are now embraced as part of their identity as citizens of a Republic of China, Taiwan. Um, needless, the other element that certainly warrants scrutiny in the context of Taiwan, and that's the chapters that precede those that look at the more military aspects of the dispute in the Taiwan Strait, are the many means by which China is trying to undermine Taiwanese institutions and society to weaken resistance. So I look at what we like to refer to as the toolkit or the sharp power toolkit that the Chinese Communist Party has been using against Taiwan to try to shape the political environment in its favor, with a view to make it easier for Beijing to annex Taiwan by non-military means or as part of a military campaign. So there is a pretty in-depth discussion on the uses of misinformation, disinformation, but also things like elite capture. There is sizable amount of business being done between Taiwan and China. With that come several opportunities to co-opt individuals who, in return for certain favors or access, might be willing to perform some political tasks on the Taiwanese side that would also facilitate Beijing's designs on Taiwan. I go into the uses of organized crime by China, the triads, that also could potentially play a role in intimidating politicians, but also given their access to firearms, they could try to destabilize society, target politicians, or perhaps conduct sabotage operations against Taiwan's infrastructure. So this is a multifaceted challenge that Taiwanese law enforcement and intelligence agencies also have to conjugate with. That is usually underreported in international coverage of Taiwan that tends to focus primarily on the military aspects of the conflict in the Taiwan Strait. But if one truly wants to understand what's going on in the Taiwan Strait, we have to look at these elements as well. I would argue that this is a very interesting and relevant part of my book as well for other societies, other democracies like Canada. I believe you recently had Dr. Charles Burton talk about his latest book as well in the context of Chinese influence operations in Canada. And there's several lessons that can be learned from Taiwan's experience. To that, I would certainly add cyber attacks as well against government institutions and private sector. These are all things that other societies like Canada, Australia, United States, you name it, are also having to deal with when it comes to their relationship with China. Then, inevitably, the later sections of my book look at the military aspects of the dispute in the Taiwan Strait. Um, and I certainly argue that what happened in Ukraine with Russia does not necessarily mean that China under Xi Jinping would make the same decisions as well. These are still different leaders. The stakes are quite different as well. The Chinese economy is a lot more global than Russian economy. So repercussions and the assessments of costs and benefits would certainly be different as well. Uh, but I also address issues like intent and capabilities, which can serve as I wouldn't say a predictor, but certainly as a yardstick by which we can evaluate the likelihood of armed conflict in the Taiwan Strait. Uh, so certainly for several years, China or the Chinese Communist Party has stated its intent of using force against Taiwan to complete the reunification of China, as they put it. But for several decades, the People's Liberation Army simply did not have sufficient capabilities for China to be able to act upon that threat. So one thing that President Xi Jinping has said, and this has oftentimes been misrepresented in international media and in different analyses, is that he ordered the People's Liberation Army to be ready and to have sufficient capabilities by 2027 to be able to use force against Taiwan if called upon by the political leadership. So as I just said, there have been several instances since retired Admiral Davidson made references to 2027. This has been seen as a signal that China would use force against Taiwan in 2027 to complete reunification of China. That is simply wrong. That misrepresents the situation. And there's absolutely no reference anywhere of Xi Jinping giving that type of order. So that discussion again looks at intent and capabilities, looks at the current state of the People's Liberation Army, and having done that, certainly weighs that against what Taiwan has been doing to augment its own preparedness with acquisition of weapon systems from the United States, changes in doctrine, and also emphasis on indigenous development of asymmetrical capabilities, from cruise missiles to drone systems and whatnot. Um, and then having done that, I present different scenarios that involve use of force in an escalation ladder. So the likeliest scenarios, and a lot of analysts would agree with me on this, I believe, is that the China would use a naval quarantine or blockade against Taiwan, using quasi-civilian resources like the China Coast Guard, its maritime militia, in conjunction with People's Liberation Army, Navy, and Air Force, and potentially rocket force, to blockade Taiwan, and in doing so, to try to compel the Taiwanese government uh, to sit down and negotiate some form of surrender, which inevitably would be on Beijing's terms. And then beyond those scenarios, I assess the difficulties and challenges and likelihood that China would decide to launch an amphibious assault against Taiwan, which I argue would be a hugely costly endeavor, not only for Taiwan, but certainly for the Chinese side as well, especially if that compelled intervention by U.S. military and potentially other allies, like Japan. And recent developments in Japan, the elections at the weekend as well, there is now a likelihood that there could be changes to Japanese constitution. And one of the changes that could be brought about is the Japan Self-Defense Force becoming more of a normal military, if you will, that could play a greater role in ensuring stability in the Taiwan Strait and within the region. Um, so
So
and then obviously,
we have about 30 minutes left, so you might want to wrap it up.
okay, well, I was almost done. Time flies.
Sure.
And then one of the last chapters looks at the different areas that the measures that Taiwan and international community can take to augment deterrence against a potential Chinese attack, economic measures, diplomatic measures, and certainly military as well. And then the last chapter places that whole conflict in the context of authoritarian resurgence around the world, and clearly positioning Taiwan, the Taiwan Strait, as one of the key front lines in that attempt by authoritarian regimes to expand their influence and potentially rewrite the international order in ways that are more beneficial to their anti-democratic systems. So I'll stop here, and I look forward to discussion. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you for that. So we're waiting for questions to come in. While we are doing that, let me start with a question. So for a long time, public opinion poll in Taiwan is kind of there's a normally distributed. You have people on the right who are older who are kind of pro unification, but there are a lot of majority of Taiwanese are pro status quo, and there are some who are kind of pro independence, right? So I saw that like 10, 15 years ago with Shirley Rieger's work. Has that shifted to the left? Have more people become pro independence, or a majority of Taiwanese still more pro status quo?
Right. Well, the most reliable and consistent polling on that question is conducted by the Election Studies Center at National Chengchi University in Taipei. And they track two key attitudes in that question, is self-identification, either as Taiwanese or as Chinese, or as Taiwanese and Chinese. And the other question is whether people support independence, de jure independence, status quo, which is de facto independence, and then unification. And then there's more granularity as well, unification now or
Yeah.
unification later if China has democratized, for example. And consistently during those now 3 decades or so, we have seen a reduction in support for unification, whether immediate or in future, which is now down in the single digits. Uh,
Oh,
Overwhelmingly, support is still for the status quo.
yeah.
And one could argue that support for independence would conceivably be higher if there were no expectation that doing so would result in armed attack by China. So there they have a gun to their head, if you will, when they answer the question on independence. But it is very clear from those opinion polls that there is overwhelming resistance to Taiwan being annexed by China. And it's very important to point out as well that it's not only DPP voters who are opposed to annexation. The great majority of people who vote for the KMT are also opposed to annexation by China. They regard themselves as citizens of the Republic of China. They might even identify themselves as Chinese, but the country in which they live is the Republic of China, and it is a liberal democratic state. So as I point out in my book, I even argue that there's two forms of independence in Taiwan. There's a Taidu, which is Taiwanese independence, and there's a Huadu, which is Republic of China independence. And those two forces, even in oftentimes these two camps are seeming capable of talking to each other or working together, have in common an opposition to annexation by China and the embrace of a liberal democratic way of life. So this is very, very much the kind of force that Beijing has to conjugate with, and to this day has not been able to find a solution or a means by which to undermine that attachment to the way of life that exists now in Taiwan, Republic of China.
That's very interesting. So let's go to the Q&A. We've got three questions so far, so I'll go through them quite quickly. From Daniel Koo, I'm a Taiwanese Canadian. What is the most effective thing I should be doing to help in the deterrence effort against PRC annexation?
Okay, as a Taiwanese Canadian, well, thank you, Daniel, for the question. And it's always nice to hear of Taiwanese overseas who are also looking for ways to help their motherland. Um, well, there's different things. Uh, I mean, as a Canadian who's lived in Taiwan for 20 years now, I've endeavored over the years to facilitate, uh, in my own capacity as an intellectual, as an academic, and at some point as a journalist, to encourage greater involvement by Canada, Canadian society, but certainly Canadian government as well, in academia. More partnerships with Taiwan, exploring areas where there can be more cooperation, whether it's in the security sector or different areas, even within the ambit of Canada's One China policy. There's certainly ways to expand what those two countries are doing together and learning from one another. This has been happening, I would argue, possibly a little bit too slowly. So the more awareness is generated within Canada as to why Taiwan matters to Canada, and how Taiwan can serve as an example for how Canada could conjugate with China. There is no country on the face of the planet that is better positioned than Taiwan to know what's going on inside China for cultural reasons, for linguistic reasons, but also, as I mentioned, because there's so much trade and business going on across the Taiwan Strait, there's a lot of opportunities for Taiwan to learn about what's going on in China and how to deal with the challenge that the Chinese Communist Party represents for democracies. So as a Taiwanese Canadian, as I said, raise awareness, encourage politicians to learn more about Taiwan and use your vote to bring to power individuals who have sufficient vision to try to do more with Taiwan.
Very good. So this is Julian from Ottawa. Do you think Prime Minister Carney's middle power thesis can include Taiwan given its exclusion from many multilateral multilateral agencies?
Right, very good question. I wrote about that recently as well, and certainly my answer to that question is yes. I believe that there's a role for Taiwan. Uh, Prime Minister Carney, in what I thought was, on the whole, a pretty quite a potent address at Davos, uh, also underscored the fact that the old way of doing things no longer works, and we need a break, if you will, with old institutions. And with that should come creative thinking as well. If you want to create a alliance of middle powers that has the capacity to address the challenges of the 21st century, you also need to move away from institutions that may no longer serve that need for the international community. And we have a series of old institutions that have been excluding Taiwan for many, many, many years. Taiwan being the world's 20th largest economy, located in a corner of the world where there is huge amounts of traffic and trade. Taiwan is a leader in different sectors that are quite relevant to the international community. It has the world's seventh largest stock market now. So continuing to exclude it from multilateral bodies or agencies is a self-inflicted wound. And I would certainly argue that we need to find ways to reduce the influence that China has on those multilateral institutions, and to find creative ways by which we can also embrace Taiwan and allow it to play the role that it deserves in those institutions.
Very interesting. There's a question from JT Sun. This is a constantly evolving situation from the Japanese election results to Xi Jinping's purge of Zhang Yuxia. And he wants to know, in the event of a conflict in the Taiwan Strait, does Taiwan's geography allow for a meaningful distinction between the front line and the hinterland? Unlike Ukraine, which possesses a vast hinterland, Taiwan is geographically constrained. Even in a conventional conflict without nuclear weapons, does the nature of modern warfare imply that the entire island's population is effectively at the risk of being on the front line?
Yeah, well, certainly geography plays a big role in the context of the Taiwan Strait. One key element is that it was arguably easier for Russian military to invade Ukraine because they simply had to cross a land border. People's Liberation Army has to cross the Taiwan Strait and then would be confronted to very, very punitive, difficult geography on the Taiwanese side. So that complicates any amphibious assault, and is one of the reasons why during World War II, the Allied forces decided to skip Taiwan and invade Okinawa instead, because they realized that an amphibious assault against Taiwan would be even more complex than the Operation Overlord in Normandy during World War II in the European theater. The flip side to this is that Taiwan, as we know, is an island. So unlike Ukraine, where citizens could certainly flee to neighboring countries, in Taiwan, it's very hard to imagine where Taiwanese could evacuate, particularly if the PLA were to block naval passages between Taiwan and the Philippines in the south, or between Taiwan and Japan in the north. So, to your question, yes, that would imply that the whole of Taiwanese society would be confronted with the reality of an armed invasion against their country. And subsequent to that, if the invasion were successful, we would see months, if not years, of pacification efforts by the PLA and People's Armed Police, which also would involve Taiwanese in some form of resistance. So having nowhere to flee for the Taiwanese, they have two. They can react in two ways. Either say we have nowhere to flee, we have to capitulate, or conversely, we have nowhere to flee, therefore we will have to fight. And that is a question that is very easy to answer in the abstract, but very difficult to answer in reality. We just do not know how we would react in these types of extreme scenarios. It's easy to say on paper or in an opinion poll that, yes, I would pick up a weapon and defend my country. But we don't know. We might be terrified and be incapacitated, or some people could find reserves and ultimately realize that they have the gumption and the capacity to involve themselves in resistance. With that comes the need for training. Training is one way by which People can shape how they react to extreme situations because they know how to react. So having regular training for reserve forces and different roles for civilian, for society as well. These are measures that Taiwan is trying to implement, having learned lessons from what happened in Ukraine. Increases the likelihood that a large segment of the population would be willing to resist an attempted invasion and occupation by China, which then contributes to greater deterrent against that kind of scenario as well.
Interesting. So there are a lot of questions that we won't have time to get to, but I want to ask you. We often hear about the silicon shield, TSMC.
Hmm.
Is that really effective as a shield against? Because Chinese economy has a lot of stake in semiconductors, right? So would they risk an invasion for potentially tanking of the Chinese economy?
Right. Well, I mean, there's no, yes, China has been making great progress in developing its own
Yeah.
semiconductor industry as well,
Yeah.
through hard work, but also through espionage and other measures. But there is no equivalent ecosystem anywhere in the world to that of Taiwan that's been built around TSMC and a constellation of other companies that's over decades of investment and vision by different administrations in Taiwan and a very active private sector. So that fuels a large segment of the global economy. And everything for the computers that we're using today for our conversation to advanced weapon systems and satellites and communication and whatnot rely on the most advanced semiconductors that at this point only Taiwanese firms are capable of producing. Uh, so one could argue that China would try to not shoot itself in the foot by destroying something that it would very much want to put its hands on and also relies upon for its own economic growth. The difficulty in all this is that it's hard to imagine that a major military operation against Taiwan that would involve barrages of ballistic and cruise missiles, and then air launch missiles and drone attacks and all that would not at some point cause collateral damage to Science Park in Hsinchu and Taoyuan and Kaohsiung and other parts of Taiwan. It's a fairly small island, Taiwan, so everything is in proximity to everything else. Uh, so it's almost impossible that TSMC and other assets would not be destroyed or at least incapacitated during armed conflict. Uh, so the international community, going back to your reference to the Silicon Shield, understands that this kind of scenario would have catastrophic consequences for the global economy. So the shield itself lies in the fact that it incentivizes people around the world to find ways to avoid that kind of scenario. So that is one of the main elements of deterrence against a Chinese attack in recent years, and especially now that TSMC has become a household name around the world, and you have powerful governments who are mightily interested in having TSMC invest in their countries. So United States, Germany, Japan, among others. So the more awareness there is and realization that Taiwan plays a leading role in that, the thicker that shield, if you will, would be. And then that would encourage policymakers and decision makers to talk to their Chinese friends and try to dissuade them from resorting to force against Taiwan.
Sure. Great. Unfortunately, we are 5 minutes past the hour, so we will have to wrap up here. So I realize that many of you have got more questions. I'll encourage you to check out Michael's book. And after reading the book, if you have got more questions, then you can reach out to him directly. Thank you again for joining us, Michael from Taipei. And thank you everyone for coming.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good evening and good morning, everybody. Bye bye.